The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm Michael Zapersky and very excited to have Connor Galway join us. Connor, welcome.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited for our conversation today. So Connor, for those who aren't familiar with you and your work, you are the founder and president of Junction Consulting, where you help companies use the internet to achieve marketing goals. Your clients include very well-known organizations like Lululemon, Vancouver Whitecaps FC, so soccer or football, depending on how you call that sport, the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Canada, Genesis Motors, and many others. And you also have served as the lead instructor at BrainStation and instructor at Capilano University in digital marketing. So let's go back in time. How did you get interested in the whole world of internet and digital marketing? Like, where did that begin and when did it begin?
Yeah, thanks for asking me that, because I have to do a little back to the future here for a second. But for those of us who remember what it was like to be at university before the internet, actually at Capilano University as a student, and we were studying out of textbooks and spending time in the library. And it was around that time that this internet thing kind of started to creep in. My friends would, talk about websites. We had just the very early social media starting to show up. And I thought to myself, one, this social media thing looks ridiculous, but two, I definitely want to check it out. So I started a Twitter account, got the university on. I don't know how I did that. And then just kind of dabbled for a little bit. Blogging was on MySpace. And then fast forward a couple of years and the Olympics were about to come here to Vancouver, my hometown. And some friends of mine were sitting around and were like, the Olympics are coming to town. The whole world is going to be paying attention to our city. If we, as some young entrepreneurial people, don't take advantage of this, we'd be idiots. And so we put our heads together. We came up with an idea to do a hockey blog, which, fast forward a little bit, ended up doing what we thought was just okay. Looking back, for a couple of people out of a coffee shop, we got 250,000 readers. We were number one search result for Olympic hockey. A lot of traction, especially for those days. But coming out of the Olympics, we kind of looked at each other and we went, that wasn't hard. It was a lot of fun. And we got 250,000 people to pay attention to something that these people working out of a coffee shop are talking about on the internet. Why isn't every business taking advantage of this opportunity? And then that's when the real idea struck, which was somebody's going to need to help all of these businesses. So we started, which was a unique idea, we thought anyways at the time, which was an agency 100% focused on the internet. And that was sort of the very beginning of the beginning of many pivots since then. But that's kind of how we got started.
And did you monetize that hockey site / blog? What was the plan behind that?
We certainly tried to. The idea was, if you remember in those days, 2010, affiliate marketing was just getting started. So we had the idea that we could take all of this traffic and we could get them interested in things, sort of write our own advertorial columns and send traffic out. It just so happens that we didn't exactly know how to work with APIs or webhooks. So I still believe to this day that we sent a whole lot of business to a lot of people, but we didn't make a single dollar.
Right, got it. Okay. But it sounds like, tell me if I'm wrong on this, that you took that experience of being able to generate 500,000 or 250,000 in traffic and use that as a bit of a case study to launch your consulting business. Is that accurate?
It seemed obvious to us. Yeah. We were like, we're just going to walk up to these businesses. We're going to knock on their door. We're going to show them what we did. And they're going to invite us in, sit us down and cut us a check. That certainly wasn't the way that it happened. In fact, what we found was we were 4 young guys. The only industry that was interested in having us was the bridal industry. And so in those days, because the bridal industry understood, they got that people were talking about weddings on the internet. So what happened was we sort of became the go-to digital marketing agency for the wedding industry in Canada. And we were writing blog posts and social media content, building websites. And if you wanted to know about dress trends in 2010 and 2011, like what colors were in, whether pockets were going to be in wedding gowns, I could have told you everything about that, which is I certainly wasn't formally trained, but it got our foot in the door and it got us started.
And so to walk me through that, like the first few clients, where did they come from? Was it through your own connections? Was it, you're saying kind of like the bridal industry, but kind of talk us through how did you go from this case study of building a hockey site to getting your first few clients as a consulting agency?
It was Twitter. What we did is we just went on Twitter. Like, yes, we tried to hustle our own networks, but we didn't really know any business people or entrepreneurs. We tried, picking up the phone. We literally walked into hotels and restaurants. But in those early days, there were a lot of business people who were trying this digital thing on Twitter. And so we just followed the ball. We struck up conversations and relationships and ended up in direct messages. And next thing you know, we'd be working for them. And so it always wasn't as easy as it sounds, but it was that in those days, if you wanted to find somebody who was at least on board with this idea of digital marketing, which was a very small segment, Twitter was a place to talk to them.
How long would you say it took you from having the concept of and the idea, let's actually go out and create a business around this, to landing that first client?
It was actually sort of a bit of a chicken and the egg, because like one of my partners in those days had been doing some contract SEO. And so it was that a bit of the genesis was, well, maybe we could talk them into working with all of us. But our first cold client, I'd say probably 2 to 3 weeks. We were all kind of just like getting set up. We worked in the Vancouver Public Library most of the time, and we're just like sort of hustling contact forms and Twitter. And yeah, that was a big day. When we landed that first $1,000 a month client, we thought, well, we made it. It's only up from here.
And was it a snowball after that? Like once you got that first client, did the next 2, 3 clients just keep rolling in through Twitter? Or did you find that your next kind of subsequent clients came from different places or different activities?
So this has definitely been a theme throughout the last now decade, which was the more narrow we focused, the easier sales got. And so we tried everything. We were working in flooring and hardware and renovations and mortgage brokers. But once we realized this sort of niche that we had carved in these days, the bridal industry, then it did snowball a little bit. Yeah, like we would go to shows, these like industry shows. We would get referrals. It became really easy to explain, well, like we understand your business and, we can sort of apply our system to it. Let's call it a very slow moving snowball in those days.
Did you ever have the concern or the fear or doubt that like maybe this isn't going to work?
No, every day. Absolutely. Yeah, without question. And there was many times, I'm sure that many people on the show can empathize with, over a decade. It was always sort of burning in the background, but there was times when it was like, oh, this is inevitably going to go to zero. Like this is definitely a bad idea. And then there's other times where it's like 99% for sure that this is going to be a success, but there is never 0%.
And how do you deal with that especially when it's the fear or the concern of like, yeah, we're going to be in big trouble. We can't make rent, or we can't pay the team, or we can't whatever. Or how do you process that? How do you overcome that doubt and that concern when it happens?
It's funny because it was very different in those early days versus sort of as the business has grown and progressed. In the early days, I don't know, like we didn't know what we were doing. We were just starting out, didn't have a whole lot to lose. We figured if we took a swing at this, like, what better time than we were like young and naive. And so if it went down, it would have been annoying. It would have been frustrating. Actually, in those days, we had all sort of collectively aggressively minimized our personal expenses to the point where we'll go, at the time, I was also like, doing service industry on the side. It would have been fine. As the business progressed and now, there's staff and there's bills to pay and there's sort of a foundation. Yeah, it's really the best, or it's the only outlet that I've found that's been really effective is other people in similar situations. So, I had this amazing network that's been started up. It's actually started as a Slack channel, and it's this group of agency and consultancy owners here in Vancouver. And what I've learned more than anything from talking to people who I wild respect for, and I think they're incredibly impressive, is that they deal with that exact same fear every day, whether it's, we call it imposter syndrome or like certainty of the uncertainty. Having that sort of seeing that reflected back in other founders is at least lets me know that, there's other people in it with me.
Right. Before we keep diving deeper into your business, how you got to where you are, the success that you've created and lessons learned along the way, I want to go back in time a little bit. You mentioned working in the service industry, and I know that you actually worked in surveillance at a couple of different casinos. Is there anything that you learned from those years and that experience that you feel has really helped you in how you approach clients, prospective clients, relationships, anything from psychology? It just seems like such a fascinating area, like surveillance, that a lot of people have no experience with. Anything that's been helpful for you?
So well done on your research, by the way. I don't actually talk about that a lot anymore, but yeah. So the backstory there is I was working as a surveillance operator through university, sort of nights and weekends to sort of pay my tuition. And almost unintentionally, I got a promotion and I got a promotion. And next thing you know, I'm wearing a suit. And casino surveillance is, you can imagine Ocean's 11, but like dialed back maybe by 100x. But yeah, I was sure that I had learned nothing from that there was nothing that I could apply to the consulting or business industry. But there were two very specific things that actually did come out of that. One was that I had an amazing boss at the time, and his name was Tim. He was this Australian manager who had come up, and to a certain extent, he took me under his wing. And what he allowed me to do in those days was to run the senior leadership meetings for the casino, which was very unorthodox. Normally, the surveillance person is sort of the person off in the corner, sort of toiling away in the darkness. But he identified this very young person and who was interested in management and leadership. And so I got to work with these people who were terrifying to me, and I got to run meetings. And so that ability to be able to walk then into an executive's office or to work directly with business leaders and be able to at least have conversations at a boardroom table was invaluable. And the other thing was actually, I think there's a misconception, or I know there's a misconception about casino surveillance is all about, the flashy thief or like the break into the vault, when in fact, casino surveillance is primarily about math. And what I mean by that, and not to get into the weeds too much, is all we're really doing is we're just tracking expected return on tables and figuring out where we're outside of a couple of degrees of standard deviation. And then when the math tells us something weird is going on, we take a look. And in a strange way, once I started to get into digital advertising and return on ad spend and ROI, I was like, oh, I see this. All it is just taking a couple of numbers, adding them up and figuring out what an expected return is on this. I can do this. And that's when we really started to get into advertising and things started to click. And so it's as much as you never would think that card counting would relate to, say, selling protein powder online, there definitely was a connection there.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I don't know if you share that much, but you certainly should. I think that's a great story. And the relation and connection between those two is pretty powerful. On that first point, being able to almost show up with executive presence, being able to connect with people that are maybe much older than you are, more senior than you are. What tip might you offer to somebody who, even if maybe they transitioned out of a corporate role, a senior role, but now they're in their own consulting business, and whether they are by themselves or with a team, reaching out to large organizations can sometimes be a little bit scary. And oftentimes people position themselves not as peers, but rather as, the client all the way up here and the consultant down here. If the client or buyer says jump, I jump, that kind of mindset. What advice would you offer to somebody to be able to create more of a peer-to-peer relationship so that you can really have a strong relationship?
I'll tell you what I think that we've done reasonably well, and I'll tell you something I'm working on. So what we figured out probably 4 years ago or so, when we were like, well, we're a digital, we just pivoted from an agency to a consultancy, and we thought we need to be everything to all people, right? We have to have a great Twitter account, and a YouTube account, and we have to have an awesome blog and like everything. We're a small team. And what we did is sort of the same thing we do for our clients, which was to figure out like, where are we actually offering value? What are we uniquely qualified to offer? And for us, it was very clear that was our email. It was news and opinions. We push all of our chips, to use the casino metaphor, all of our chips in that direction. And we've been writing the brief every Monday ever since. And that's become invaluable because now the relationship that I have with a lot of these leaders and executives, because we have readers from nearly every Fortune 500 on there, that now that the relationship is Connor as the writer or Connor as the person who's coming up with ideas or thoughts or opinions, and not so much as Connor as the salesperson. That's been incredibly valuable. But there's a bit of advice that I love that I heard from, somebody I have a lot of respect for here in Vancouver. Her name is Tess Sloan. She runs 1111 Talent, which is a recruiting agency. And she said, I think she actually said it on their Instagram account, but she said that what changed for them in the sales process was when they started treating their clients like people and not like these monoliths. And I'm paraphrasing here, but tactically what I took that as was these are all just humans who are working in jobs. They have, thoughts and feelings and stresses and anxieties. And so what they've started to do, as I understand it, is just pick up the phone and call them, take them for coffee, like have conversations and say, what are you working on? What are you stuck on? And then maybe there's an opportunity for us to help or to, work together. And like, I think we've all fielded these sales calls before where, people are ostensibly trying to do that. And you can tell, right? You can tell when somebody's just like, can I, buy you a coffee? And the pitch is coming. But the way Tess does it is just so authentic and so real. And, as far as I understand it, and certainly as I've been implementing it into our business, I've noticed this, that it's amazing what starts to come up. And it might not even be with that person, right? Like that person knows somebody at another organization or these big companies in particular I remember being terrified to approach here in Vancouver, like a Herschel or an Aritzia. I would never approach a Lululemon or somebody like that. And now you realize that each one of those companies is actually like dozens or hundreds of small teams. And each one of those teams, as they say, humans who have, thoughts and anxieties and needs. And so it's certainly something we're working on, but treating humans like humans is something that's been instrumental for us.
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. You mentioned that you shifted from the agency model, more classic implementation agency model, to a consultancy model with more strategy, more advice. Why do that? What caused that shift?
Yeah, people told me that I was nuts at the time, because people who I really respect, because they're like, agency is scalable, you keep clients on. But the moment that I knew that it needed to shift was we kind of looked around. This was in, I think, 2015. And we had noticed this, call it the digital revolution or whatever you want to call it, had happened. And there was 2 very different types of clients. There was the type of client who, and I'm sure that, you all can empathize with the type of client where you're kind of battling with them every month. You're always trying to justify your work. They're always trying to get more out of their agency. And it just felt like a very us versus them relationship. And then there was the type of client who knew exactly what they wanted and they understood the direction they were going. They might not do everything internally, but they were making progress and they had a strategy, and it was very clear that they were going to be successful. And we said, well, the agency model is actually the way that we had done it. And I'm sure that it was very flawed the way we had done it, but the agency model is actually better set up for that first type of client, because you're actually trying to drag as many services out of the client as possible to grow your retainer. And we thought, well, if we believe that the second type of client is the future and that's the way that people are going to be successful, especially with social and digital, what are we doing here? And so that's when we effectively at that time, we burnt the boats. We got rid of or passed off or fired all of our service-based clients and switched to consulting. And what has been ever since is what we exist to do is to build capacity inside organizations. So that means like, where are you going? What are you doing? A lot of times it means executive training. But what we've learned is that very specific thing that we're trying to do actually opens up tons of doors. So the initial conversation is, we know, and this is usually how it goes, we know that we could be doing more with our digital. Our agency is, doing a pretty good job. Our frontline staff, they're doing their best. Speaking on behalf of our clients here, I, as a leader, could probably be providing better direction. And I don't know, I don't know what I don't know. And so we come in to solve that very specific problem. And soon enough, as I say, there's training that's necessary. There's operational planning that's needed. There's coaching and leadership. And so to answer your question directly, we switched because we saw a very specific need. And I hadn't really mapped out what all of the products and services that would be necessary would be, but we've kind of built them as we go.
And when a client or let's say a buyer that you would love to work with says, yeah, Connor, I would love to work with you and your team, but we really don't have the talent or the resources to implement on these recommendations. So we can only work with a company that can implement and help us to actually put its plan into action. How do you now deal with that if you're not providing the services or the implementation work for clients?
It's hard. And I've learned the hard way over and over again to say no, even when it hurts, because I've said yes. And when I've said yes, it's gone poorly. And what I mean by that is like when we try to provide the service that we're not specifically set up to provide, what ends up happening is either we're not the best to provide that service, or we get distracted, or we're just not focused. But when we do refer it out to somebody we love, and we build that relationship with these other agencies or talented creators, then, I mean, everybody ends up winning, right? The company we referred it to, they're stoked, client is happy because they get the right service. And in the long run, it is a long run. And so we're all going to end up working together.
So is the solution that you say to the client or to this buyer, we can still do the strategy for you. We can provide some training if you need. But when it comes to implementation, here's our trusted kind of partner and resource. So you would still try and maintain the strategy work, or do you just kind of pass it all over to the other company?
Strategy, absolutely. And so here's something that I really believe about strategy, and sometimes it can come off as controversial. So I'll throw this on the table and you take from it what you will. I think that agencies are in conflict when it comes to strategy. And here's what I mean. When an agency is developing strategy, effectively what it's doing is it's helping a client to make investment decisions. Should we be investing in media there? Should we be investing in content there? What are the strategic things that we should be doing? But then the agency, of course, is going to be the one executing. So they have certain capabilities in-house. They might have a great JavaScript development team. They might be able to build an app. They might have media buying, but they might not have, let's say, for example, Amazon services. Well, what if for that client, the absolute best place they should be investing their time and energy is in Amazon? Well, chances are they're not going to recommend that within the strategy. So that creates an inherent conflict as far as I'm concerned. And I really believe that the reason why we're seeing the industry, a lot of the budget is moving towards boutique consultancies and smaller shops is because we're seeing that. We're seeing that there are people who are best suited to be providing those specific services. And then what ends up happening is then we, rather than being pigeonholed into one provider or another, we can go, oh, okay, who could we bring in? Do we need a big agency, or could we create sort of a cocktail of very talented individual providers?
Right. I can see how this would allow you to go from, let's say, potentially a much larger headcount to a much smaller headcount, because you're not requiring, or you don't need to do the implementation and provide those services. You're providing the strategy or the training. Your website currently lists 3 kind of core team members, but you've worked with some very large and well-known organizations. How is your team structured? Like, who does within the company?
Yeah. So every engagement sort of has 3 basic people on the engagement. And there's always the person who's sort of leading, we call it strategy, whether it's training or implementation or whatever, there's always strategy. There's always the person who is responsible for running the project. We call it project management, if you like. And then there's always the person we call like the research analyst, or the person who's coordinating. And so that scales very easily, right? So what we would keep 100% of the time inside the business is the big idea. Right. So that's strategy. So any one of those 3 people you saw on the website can, take that on. But project management, project coordination, even like the gathering of data, the organization of data, that's nearly infinitely scalable. So effectively what we've done is a basic 80-20 to say, like, what is that 20% that delivers 80% of the value that needs to be kept in-house?
Right. And so you typically would work with contractors. You have kind of like a roster of people that you trust that would help you on the project management and the data analysis side. And so those people would be brought in to work with either yourself or the 2 other key team members, right, to roll it out. Is that correct?
100%. And this allows us to sort of, walk the talk, if you will, because if you think about this too, let's say I built a team out to call it 20 people. Then what I'm going to have is some very specific skill sets, or generalists, but I'm going to have people who are really good at, say, consulting on copy or media buying, or consulting on a dev project. But right now, what I'm able to do is, scope a project and bring in somebody who is, one of Canada's leading digital researchers, or somebody who has deep media buying knowledge, and bring those people into the project. So under the strategy that we've been developing, or the operating plan that we've been developing, sort of put together the ideal mix.
That makes sense. You have kind of 3 core areas or service offerings, from strategy, training, and then consulting services. Do you find that most clients tend to start with one of those? Like, there's a typical entry point, and just how do you think about those 3 offerings and why those 3 specifically?
Yeah, it's usually, to be honest with you, it's usually training, because most people, most of the time, they're like, we generally have a strategy, but also strategy is scary, right? Because it sounds big and expensive, and like, maybe at the end of it, you just get a PDF and the consultant walks away. And then consulting is sort of the catch-all. That's solving a very specific problem that's helping to roll something out. But what everybody knows that they need is they need a better equipped team. They need, there's new platforms coming out all the time. And so, yeah, almost always in the development of the training, then it's like, okay, well, tell me a little bit about how your digital marketing model works. And they're like, our what? And I'm like, well, tell me about how you get work done. And they're like, well, we just get work done. And then I explained to them a little bit about how organizations grow and scale and develop. And then, lots of times we'll do training for clients for months or years even. And that's awesome. But very often that sort of is the tip of the spear.
Got you. That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot and been growing the number of digital marketing firms or digital consultancies or, digital this, that, and the other. Obviously a lot more today than there were back when you first got started. How do you differentiate? How do you make sure that your brand, your company is seen as having a clear advantage in the marketplace? Like what steps do you take and what do you feel is kind of the core differentiation or advantage that you've been able to create in the marketplace?
Yes, I'm a big fan of the Blair-Ann's school of thinking on this, which is like vertical or horizontal thinking. And we've done an okay job and then a pretty good job at times when it comes to positioning. But there's a couple of different things. One, I think that we're reasonably well horizontally positioned and that we believe in this concept called digital from the inside out. It's a term we've coined, which is this idea that digital is not a marketing campaign. It's not a social media strategy. That like every business now, and the pandemic has frankly like helped us to, convince people of this, that every business is fundamentally a digital business. And so what that means is that HR has processes, finance has processes, manufacturing and retail does. But like most of us we haven't taken digital seriously enough to actually build a strategy or plan around it. So that's somewhat differentiated. It's not defensible, of course. Anybody else could come along and do that, but it's somewhat differentiated. But then what we do is we prove that out by vertical. And so we've been very successful in sort of travel and tourism, for example. We are, I think, pretty objectively we have the best knowledge base and experience on the Canadian tourism industry in Canada and maybe the North American tourism industry. Retail, we've been very successful with clients like Article, Lululemon, Aritzia. And so by really proving out that vertical expertise and then taking that, getting introductions, creating case studies, publishing content and studies around that, I find that having some horizontal and then going deep on a vertical is the way this worked for us.
Yeah, that's great. So your answer now might actually transition directly into my next question, which is how are you going about, like, what do you find today in 2022 that is working best when it comes to lead generation and acquiring new clients?
Owned media, to be honest with you. We've dabbled with digital advertising. We've tried LinkedIn. Pre-pandemic, anytime our sort of lead funnel would dry up, I would find a conference and go give a talk and then everything would be fine. But honestly, that email that we started back in 2016 has been by far the best thing we've ever done.
And that's the brief you're referring to, right?
That is the brief. Correct. And we never sell, never pitch. We barely even talk about our services, but it's positioned us really well. And I know people listening will be like, well, that's not an easy answer, right? That's not something I can just do in the next month. You're right. It's not. But investing in owned media has been by far the best investment we've ever made. And I frankly wouldn't know where to start today if I was starting from zero because, when we first started, Facebook ads works, right? Now, maybe not. It was remarkable that we were on Twitter. Now everyone's on Twitter. But so investing in those relationships, frankly, talking to folks like you and sort of slowly growing that attention and that recognition over time, that's been the most successful thing that we've done.
You've mentioned that the brief, kind of your newsletter and email that goes out, is very well read. It reaches into very large organizations and very senior decision makers in those organizations. What do you think makes it special? If you kind of had to break down and say, yeah, these are the ingredients that are they're essential. They need to be, they're the fiber and the culture of the brief just makes it special and creates the impact that it has. What are those different elements?
Mm-hmm. Well, so here's a cliche answer, but we started by scratching our own itch, right? So in the early days, we would send out a weekly report to all of our clients, all right? And this is as we were transitioning from service to consulting. So it was still how's your Google Analytics doing and et cetera. But we had this idea that a Junction client should never be surprised by something that was happening on the internet. A Junction client should never, come to a meeting and not know about an SEO change or not know about a social trend. And so we would just write a blurb that would go at the bottom of their reports every week. Just we called it this week on the internet. And then slowly over time, our clients would say, hey, can you cut that off of the report for me? Because I want to forward it to the whole team. And then I want to forward it to all my friends in the industry. And so we're like, okay, fine. We'll put a contact form up and people can sign up for it. But it was like, we don't really want subscribers because this is mostly for our clients.
Right.
And then it was finally maybe, I guess, a year and a half in, we had 500 readers or something like that. We sort of, okay, we'll release this out into the world. And so we still write it the same way. I write it every sort of Sunday/Monday and it goes out on Monday. I want everybody who reads it to feel like they understand what's going on in digital and they walk away with something really tangible. And we're not objective. And what I mean by that is it's entirely subjective. It is opinion. It's hot takes. People disagree with us sometimes, and that's awesome. And so whereas, there's lots of great resources out there for just like the ABCs of what's going on, I think we offer a little bit of a filter and a bit of a take on what's happening in digital.
And how do you think about, how do you plan to find the content or find the ideas that you're going to write about? Because I think there's a lot of consultants who are very good at what they do. They have deep knowledge in their area of expertise, but they're not very consistent, if doing at all, of getting their knowledge out there into the marketplace. So what's been your process, or what do you use to be able to kind of get the ideas for writing this? And then what does that process look like to actually write it itself?
Yeah, for me, it's been like the fear of a deadline without question. Like setting that expectation and just publicly announcing to everybody, even when it was only like our 30 clients, that you will get this from us every week. And then publicly announcing to the world that like, we are going to send this email out every Monday. There will be times when it's like, honestly, 11 o'clock in the morning on Monday and I've barely gotten started and it's full panic mode. But I have to get it done. So that's one. And two, we have this Slack channel on the team that we call Junction University. And it's just a brain dump. It's just as we wander through the world and see things on Twitter, on Hacker News, on, wherever we happen to see it, we just drop those links and we're just chatting about it all the time. And so when it's time for me to actually put it together, usually it's on sort of Sunday afternoon. I'm like, what's been going on the internet? And I can just pull back into that. And now we started to formalize that to a certain extent where, at our Friday team meetings, we have that conversation. We make sure that it's scheduled in. And so effectively, like the team's got lots of takes. They're out seeing different things that I'm not seeing. And then it's just a matter of distilling it down and adding a little bit of flavor to it.
Got you. Yeah, that's great. Before we wrap up, Connor, a few more questions here for you. You have obviously a lot going on with the company and writing and your team and all the contractors and all that kind of stuff. If you were to identify a couple of habits, or maybe even only one habit that you feel really leads to like the productivity and the positive performance that you're able to achieve as a leader, what is that practice or what is that habit that you kind of go to on a regular or daily basis?
So this is brand new. And I had heard this a couple of years ago. I would have thought it was the dumbest answer. Well-run meetings. And what I mean by that is, so we sort of had this ethos for years that meetings are a waste of time. Corporate culture is broken. And that by removing, it was very like, if you remember 37 Signals and the Basecamp crew, they were like the unmeeting culture, and I fully bought into that. What I've learned recently, especially in this line of work, we're not devs, we're not building code, right? That we do need collaboration. And we do need to share ideas. And certainly for me, as evidenced by the brief, I deal well with accountability. And so rather than choke our days with a whole lot of meetings, what we do is we call them sessions. We book very specific sessions. So every Monday we have a kickoff. It's just, what are all the things we're going to do this week? Every Friday we have a review. We review sort of business success. And in between when there's important work that needs to be done, we book the most important people on that team and we all sort of sprint on that work. And it might be half an hour, it might be an hour, but I find it's incredible how much we can get done because I know, for example, right now, this afternoon, I have a sprint scheduled. And so I have to have all of my stuff together. I have to be prepared for it. And when we're there, we're all working together. And once we're done, we probably got, what I would have found ways to put off for 2 weeks. I got it all done in a single hour. So like I said, it hurts me to say meetings, but well run, like specific intentional sessions has been our key to success recently.
Yeah, no, I love that. And do you include your contractors in those meetings? Like you have your Monday and your Friday. Is that only the core team of 3 or are you also involving contractors in that? And if so, I'm wondering how you manage that because that could have a lot of different opinions and maybe a waste of time for certain people. So how do you approach that?
Yeah. So the Monday and Friday is core team. And so however many people happen to be on the core team at the time. And the sessions could be whoever happens to be working on a project at the time.
Got you. Makes sense. Second to last question. Over the last 6 months, the most impactful, your favorite book that you have either read or listened to, could be fiction or nonfiction, just something that you've really enjoyed.
Yeah, you know what? I'm a huge fan of Greg McKeown. He's my favorite keynote speaker, perhaps of all time. People might know him from writing Essentialism. And so I really liked Essentialism. As you can tell, like I have a lot of things going on and a lot of thoughts. And so I thought that did a really good job of sort of distilling things down.
All right. So yeah, the Greg McKeown, the new book, it's called
Effortless. And I took away from that book, and Greg McKeown it's a phenomenal storyteller. And some people will say his books could be an essay. Sure. But I got a ton of value out of the book because what it really did is it helped me to understand that there are things that require superhuman strength. There's times when we need to be 12 out of 10. And without question, those things are important. But there's also times when we just need to get it done. And we can't always be 12 out of 10. And I alluded earlier to 80-20. And I love this idea of 80-20 analysis because now it's allowed me to look at our work and say, okay, well, 80% of the time, we're already really good at what we do. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's just get those things done. And then 20% of the time, we can be phenomenal. Like we can do things that are going to surprise even ourselves, but we don't have to do that 100% of the time. So Effortless has been something that I've been thinking about constantly since I read it. I can recommend to the audio version. I've read it and listened to it, but he's just such a great speaker.
Right. He's got a very nice accent.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Well, we will have that linked up in the show notes as well. But finally, Connor, thank you so much for coming on. I want to make sure that people can learn more about you and your work in Junction. Where's the best place for people to go to just learn more about everything you have going on?
It's an easy one. The brief. Right? So we sign up at thebrief.wearejunction.com. But if you want to like hang out with us, see our content, or just chat with us, we're pretty active on Instagram. So we're Hey Junction on Instagram or Twitter as well. We're always on Twitter.
Yeah, we'll link that up as well. Connor, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.